Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has been waiting for me to finish yet another FMV game,
Tim Longo. Literally moments ago. I generally never jump on your stream, but I thought, I wonder if he's still in there.
Yes, I was.
Finishing up Exile, right?
Yes, Myst 3. I am down the Myst and sequels and children and whatever spiritual successor rabbit hole. Because not only did I complete Abduction, I think, before you had even started it when we discussed that.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I then went to Riven, played that completely through without any help, and now have beaten, as of this evening, Myst 3 Exile without any help to follow on from our Myst discussion a few weeks back. So
you're going to read the novels, too?
So I actually have the Book of Atris out from the library right now.
Are you serious? You're starting to sound like me now.
No, it's bad. I check my hair every morning just to make sure it's all still there.
Yeah, that's what happens if you get deep into lore stuff. You start losing your hair.
If I get too much like you.
Got it. Yeah. So. Okay, that's where I went wrong. I got too far into Warcraft lore.
That's it, right? And you started turning into like an orc or something. Anyway, you were in thrall to thrall.
Who has a lot of hair, by the way. So that's not all orcs are bald. But wow, we've really gone off the rails.
We have not. We're not even anywhere near the game that we're actually talking about this week, which is our continuing discussion of Super Castlevania IV. Sorry for folks last week that I had just come back from a week away. And although I thought I was going to be up for doing a podcast, it turned out I was so not. I was so tired by the time we would have been recording that I just could not do it.
Just so the audience knows, like Brett, when we were texting back and forth, he barely could make complete sentences.
Yeah. I tweeted out besides, and from the cast account, and made a typo in that.
Oh, I didn't notice.
Yeah, that was bad.
Yeah, so it was good. It was a good call. We've missed a few weeks here and there, but I don't know. We've done pretty well over time.
Yeah, we really haven't missed that many, like 4 or something like that. So
that's
hasn't been too bad.
I'm
in
fairly happy with that. Yeah, with
3.5
not being our day jobs. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so Super Castlevania IV.
Yes, let's get back to that.
2. Yeah.
It was something else getting back to this after. I mean, I had played some last week trying to prep for the cast, but I was so zonked that it really wasn't going in, and I had not really finished the homework either. Just like, I think I can discuss some things, but But this is a grueling game. It is. I've been really liberally making use of quality of life features that are in the SNES Classic. Notably, you can literally stop at any point and rewind. It varies per game, I guess, but like a minute or two. So I can just like, I just died to that boss. Let me just go to the beginning of that fight.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Or literally in the middle of a fight, take a last hit and go, I wonder if I just went back 3 seconds, if I could do that. If I just
wow. It's like you're playing a whole different game in a way.
Oh, it really is. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it is. It's like playing Braid or Prince of Persia: Sands of Time.
Yeah.
It's a totally different experience from that point. You see the same game, but you don't have the frustrations because last week I guess what had happened was I was playing, I guess it was Stage 4. Yeah. And that's the one that has 2 bosses in it. And there's this crazy section where you're doing this vertical movement up. So it's after the first boss, which is that skull. And we'll get to all this in a minute. And then you have to navigate this whole level where you're climbing up vertically. And there's all these platforms, and you get squashed against ceilings if you don't move fast enough to side. I mean, it's just nuts. And that section is really long. And then there's a boss on the other side of it. And I could not get past just that section.
Yeah.
And I was like, maybe I should try to figure out how this rewind thing works. And I went out to try it, and I accidentally reset the game.
You didn't tell me that. So that's
and I said, okay, you know what? I think I'm done. Because I was already just like, okay, I'm frustrated and I'm tired. I think I've played enough to talk. And then I was like, yep, okay, so I'm done. I was streaming. I'm like, okay, that's it for tonight. And I ended up being a little under the weather as well. You can actually still hear it a little in my voice.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. Well, that would do it. That would do it. Time to you had to reset yourself at that point.
I really did. I really did. I was about ready to. I was like, oh, this is why people break controllers.
Yeah. And I mean, similar for me because I'm playing the collection, anniversary collection on the Switch, as people know, and that doesn't have a rewind feature as far as I know, but it does have a save feature. You have one save you can make,
right.
And so yeah, I mean, I'm using it. I won't lie. I'm using it liberally. And I don't think we would be continuing if we didn't have these features, to be honest.
I don't see myself getting past stage 4.
Yeah, that stage in particular.
I don't see that happening in a world without this rewind, or even just a save would have been helpful. I just don't see it happening for me.
So I did a little digging on sort of the difficulty and sort of, just simple, like what are the Google search themes out there for this game, and what do people think about, or what do people talk about? And a lot of the threads are, I believe, actually level 4 is the one that's cited as the wall stage. Yeah. And there's a lot of threads that generally just have the theme of why is this game so unfair?
Right.
And it's very just intentionally punishing, still very good. And I will say, despite that, and probably because of the save feature, obviously I'm enjoying it a lot more. The game is growing on me over time, which I didn't anticipate. This is not, as I think I've said on the podcast before, this sort of genre is not really my go-to genre. Kind of platforming with combat combo is just too stress-inducing for me. So I don't really gravitate toward it mostly, and so I just anticipated it would be a slog for me to play for the podcast. But it is growing on me because of some of the cleverness that's going on, and I like the theme of the game and stuff like that. But yeah, without the I can't imagine. I know now why people have always said that this game is so crazy. And the thing that I was starting to think about when it comes to the subject of how unfair it is why I don't remember feeling that with Super Mario World, which we played for the podcast as well. Similar era, same console. And of course, we have the Nintendo factor, which is always that special sauce that is really hard to nail down and put your finger on what the differences are. But I wanted to at least bring up, we played that probably, it was a while ago, right?
Probably 2 years ago, yeah. It was a while ago.
We wouldn't be able to pull out anything specific probably, but the most that I could come up with is I feel like that game and Mario in general and Nintendo in general does a better job at easing you into the difficulty and teaching you a lot, doing a much better job at teaching you what you need to know at the right time. And again, we don't know the specifics of how they systematically break that down to achieve that goal, but we just know that they do achieve it. And though this game has been fun because they're being so experimental in so many ways, which we'll get to in a bit, I'm sure as well. I think the enemy design is clever in lots of different cases, and the combinations of enemies and level design is really cool. But they're just basically throwing stuff at you. There's no teaching, there's no ramping up.
I would probably contest that. I think there is teaching and ramping up. I think it's subtle and quick. It's a very short ramp, but I think there is a ramp. I mean, we'll talk about that. That enemy that pushes you into spikes and things like that. There are. I feel like there are like iterations on a theme, and the first one's fairly straightforward.
That's fair.
And
That's
then,
fair.
But then it's right away that the next one is hard. And
Right.
Another one is those platforms that spin, and you can fall through, and it's not punishing. But then immediately, like, the next challenge you see with those is like figuring out, oh, how do I actually jump across these things? I think that's part of it. And there's really not a lot of like extra lives and things like that. So there's just a punishing, like, you can't just grind for coins or whatever like you could in, there's no equivalent in this. But I found a 1-up once on like stage 4 or 6 or something like that, and was like, I didn't even know this had these because this is the first one I found. So there's also that there's no there's not a lot of soft landing for failure as far as that goes.
It might be a tuning thing. Yeah, because even the food health ups, are not, like, they're probably out there, but generally they're not. They're harder to find. A lot of times they're behind bricks and things like that. Walls that you can destroy, but you have to find those too. And it's not really an exploration game, so a lot of the ways that you would want to kind of keep yourself topped off would involve like really like hunting and pecking and pixel hunting and exploring
and
the
additional
levels.
Risk.
Add additional risk with a timer. There's things conflicting with that goal when they're hiding stuff so much. So, but it is a game of its time, and it's, as Brett mentioned in pre-show, it's a shorter game. And so, you want to get your money's worth, et cetera, but at what cost? I was actually going to use those spinning green platforms as an example. So you were saying, because I don't remember, the reason that I was going to use those as an example of a missed opportunity for better ramp up is my memory is the first time you find those, there isn't a safe fall area, but you're saying there was? Is that what your memory was?
I'm pretty sure there was one right before that.
You could be right. Maybe I'm misremembering because maybe what it was. Oh, I know what it was. Okay. You might be right. But those, bear with me for a second. I'm going to get super nitpicky, but just to try to make a point about the fairness and sort of the ramp up. The first time you meet, and this is why I'm zeroing in on these particular ones, the first time that you encounter those green platforms that spin, they only spin when you land on them, right?
Right.
The first time you find them, they are in.
You can walk straight across them.
You just walk straight across. So you don't know their behavior, right? You don't know how they actually act or how they will be intended to act. So if you fall through there, I think you are safe. But there's no reason for you to jump on top of them to see what their behavior is.
Right. And I think And I think I had done that had happened to me just because I tend to jump a lot anyway, just to. That's part of how I play. I'm always kind of jumping and seeing if I can reach a secret and like try to shoot things, and just I think I'm testing maybe a little bit more how the things work, and maybe that's just how I played that happened to me.
And so that I did not, right? So I just ran straight across, and I was like, oh, there's green color here. Okay. Well, I assume it's going to collapse when I walk on it, but it's like, oh, it didn't collapse. Huh.
Right.
Okay, so then I just kept walking. And then the next time you see them, you're required to jump on top of them, and then you die, right?
Right, and you have to do this weird quick jump. Like, you have to really... Yeah, you have to, like, just as you land, like, as you're landing, you have to jump again. Yeah, that is a tough jump. But it took me a while even to learn... Like, I died a whole ton of times at that spot, just trying to... Like, what am I supposed to do here? These drop really fast, and that felt unfair because there had never been anything like that where I like had to do that weird double jump. Of course, then having learned it there, you soon do it again because there's like some crumbling wall and maybe another one of those green things. There's like a crumbling platform.
Yeah, there's a series of them, I think.
Yeah, you do a series of those kind of jumps, and there's other places too that will happen with that later, but. Yeah, I definitely got to that. I was like, what am I not getting here?
Yeah. Well, and the only way to experiment at that point, because you can't, go back or whatever, is to just die, right? And to figure out what that timing is. But my point with the initial encounter with them is they could have easily designed that initial encounter to force you to jump on top of them, right? And then fall to the floor where you're learning that in a safe way.
Right.
And make it a forced behavior, learning behavior there. And then you'd be able to practice what you're talking about that you had to practice over a death fall. You could practice it with a safe fall, right? And that's the kind of thing that I think Mario, as I'm just kind of making a blanket statement because I don't have a Mario example to counter that exactly, but I feel like that sort of mentality is really what they come at it from, right? Where they give you those opportunities. And you could see that in this game, their heart was in the right, I think they were on the right direction with placing them earlier. It's just they didn't force you to see what except for yourself that actually kind of happened to do it. But I think it's a really good, it's a little bit of a good sort of micro lesson for ways to, I just saw it as a missed opportunity for a way to really, because that was a really frustrating section once you realize what you did have to do with the ones where you do have a death fall.
Right.
And then looking back, I was like, wait a second, I just ran across these moments ago. They could have taught this to me there.
Yeah.
And it was a missed opportunity. So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think that is, I think that is their thing that they don't quite execute on. And I don't know if it's like, I wonder if there's lack of, I mean, they would have had to break up their design, I think, pretty significantly differently. Maybe they're running against memory limits. I don't really know.
Yeah, they may not have had the runway to do that. I mean,
especially so early in the system's life, right? I mean, this is the year it came out, so I think maybe they're just getting their footing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's forgivable for sure. Like I think generally it's still a very, very good game.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And especially of the era.
We may not have feel that way if we didn't have some assists, but we might feel like this is the worst game ever.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think we always have to, this happens on the podcast. We always have to put it in its time too, right? In the context for what was going on. And this game wasn't alone. Like you go back and I'm sure the developers, people would say, man, you made a really hard game. This game's so hard. But, to them, it's like all the games were this way. There wasn't like of this genre, or sort of in this ilk, right? There were times in Super Metroid I felt like was super punishing too,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that was a Nintendo game. So it's just, so we have to kind of always remind ourselves of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And some of that is the history of arcades, right? And arcade games are difficult explicitly to separate you from your money. And there were other ways they tried to separate you from your money, as we talked about with the Mortal Kombat 2 stories and things like that. But that was just the sort of design paradigm: is challenge is fun, right? I mean, that's kind of the underlying mechanics of these things. Yeah. And so I mean, I'm happy that these days we have multiple axes upon which we base our fun, because I couldn't just play games like this. This would be, I probably would stop playing games if all of them were this difficult.
Well, you brought that up in pre-show too. I think it's worth mentioning again, not to sort of utter one of the recent sort of discourses that sort of blew up with Sekiro again, but you had brought up that one of the release valves for the Dark Souls sort of wave, which we talk about often because it's the sort of modern version of a difficult game, is the grinding ability and the ways that the sort of the options they give you there. And then I brought up the point, well, Sekiro doesn't have that sort of stuff, but Brett did bring up a good point that structurally Sekiro does give you some pressure release valves with not having to always bang your head against the same enemy. You can kind of, dabble in certain areas and then kind of maybe try a different one. It's not, neither of us have actually played it, so we know this thoroughly. We don't know this thoroughly, but we know that there's some, there's some options there. But with this game, if you hit that, stage 4, and you're in that section where those blocks are coming up and you're having to quickly vertically go up, you have no option but to master that section. and you can't go and dabble, can't go backwards, and and although sometimes you can go backwards, and it's really confusing to me when it is, and I haven't really dabbled with it much.
And that's that's partly it being a timer game, right? You can't you can't afford it, as you were pointing out, as far as exploration goes. You can't afford to go back because who knows if you're going to have enough time to make it back, make it back forward again. I feel like I find a lot of secrets, but part of that is I just kind of throw the whip at every surface and just, I don't know, I feel like I can read a little bit what they're where they might be. They seem they seem to make some sense. Yeah, you get into their head is a good way to put it. But yeah, it's often taking you off the beaten path. And as I pointed out, there's this risk involved that you might go, back to the left enough that now when you come back, you're going to have to refight some enemies because they've respawned. Because as soon as something goes off the screen, it's been unloaded from memory so that they don't have to do collision on it and things like that. So it's just not there anymore. And you go back and it's like, oh, well, there should be one here, so we'll just put it back. Which is another thing that's a carryover from that time. That's kind of not something you see much of anymore.
Well, one interesting thing that I was thinking about when it comes to falling in the vertical levels specifically, that, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but comparing it to a game of its time in Super Metroid's world was a fully contiguous sort of constructed world, right? Where you're exploring it, going back and forth. And so the way that they built the memory footprint of that, they always had what they needed, right, for the player to interact with. And the reason I'm bringing this up is in those vertical levels in Castlevania, when the camera moves up to a certain point, if the platform below is no longer on screen, it's below the frame, and you fall down, you will fall to your death, even though there's a platform right below.
Even though there should be a platform there. Yeah.
And in Metroid, that isn't the case. The camera will just scroll down with you as you fall. Now, you could fall onto an enemy or something that you don't see, so it's still not, still could be dangerous. But technically, if that platform is below the screen and you fall in Metroid, that level is still contiguous, right? So it's a watertight sort of situation. So there's differences. It's just a different genre, basically.
I
think my brain doesn't always make that leap quickly enough,
Yeah.
Like that I will fall and in one of those vertical levels and know that there's a platform literally right below the camera, and then I'll die and I'm like, oh yeah, right, that's this kind of game. you know?
Yeah. I don't really understand why it is that way. I mean, that doesn't. It's like I said, I think there's memory benefits there and performance benefits, and they are often animating more of the screen, especially in those vertical levels. Like there's flowing water, and there's a lot of effects that can go on in there. And I don't know, maybe they're just making a trade-off that way, and because this game is not a game that always performs super well, especially in the Mode 7 sections. And although I appreciate the effects they're going for and they're super neat, at the same time, it's like, okay, I can see that they're basically probably really scraping for memory, and they probably would have had the hardware for less time than Nintendo did, right? Obviously, because Nintendo developed the hardware. So they were competing as quickly as they could and trying to get something out in the first year or whatever, without having had the hardware as long as an internal team would have. So there's also those kind of limitations as well.
It could have been just a choice. I mean,
and it also could have been a choice.
That's a bit of an old school mentality that games were doing. So even Mario, I think, would do that, right? In some of its levels that sort of were similar. That's why I brought up Metroid specifically, because it's sort of different.
Yeah, you're possibly right. Yeah, maybe just a design choice.
But anyway, I think we have a little segue there to the Mode 7 stuff. To your point about performance, I guess I wasn't as sensitive to the performance as you were, but I will say, and you reminded me that they did a little bit of this in the beginning of Super Metroid, where Nintendo was testing this out, but I don't remember a lot of crazy stuff like this in Super Mario World, other than like, I feel like wasn't there a moment when Bowser sort of comes at the screen in a 3-dimensional way or something, and he
I think so. Yeah.
But in level 4, when you're in that room and there's that quick moment where you're like, wait a second, how is this room working? And then it starts spinning.
Yeah. I push it a long way.
Yeah, but I was impressed. I was like, wow,
no, I was too.
This is some bold stuff.
Yeah. And then they had those Medusa heads. I was less happy with the boldness.
Yeah, that's another. It must be another infamous Medusa head moment where it's like you curse those things. Yeah, and that's a perfect example of unfair, right? They've just thrown this completely mind-bending moment in a console game at you, which again at the time I'm sure blew people's minds. It blew my mind. I was completely caught off guard. I was like, this is amazing. And then the Medusa heads start coming in. I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. I did that section a lot of times.
yeah, I bet. But then the next room or the next area 4-3, I think, is where you have the sort of the whole sort of spinning background, like you're in a tube or something.
Yeah, like you're in a cylinder, basically.
Yeah. Similar to the old Bionic Man episode. That's what it made me think of, which I'm dating myself on. Most of the audience members probably don't even know what Bionic Man is. But anyway, and that was another one. Yeah, right.
Better, stronger, faster.
Yeah. How far are you going to go?
That's about all I can remember. Oh God, the Sasquatch.
Yeah, but then they switch it up, right? They that wasn't as much about the sort of mechanical aspects of the level, but the effect of it, and that's where the performance got bad, right? You were saying in that one where
in particular you will hit a skeleton as it's coming down out of the ceiling and it'll explode into a bunch of skeleton bits, and boy will it crank down to sub 10 frames per second. I think it's pretty low. I'm not sensitive to frame rate as a general rule, but that was like, ooh, that's pretty bad. Yeah. It's interesting because I remember reading for the Super Metroid discussion about how the Mode 7 allowed for these affine transformations, which is basically 2-dimensional transformations of the background, and thinking, that's kind of cool. They did that weird tilty thing, and then just not kind of thinking it all the way through of how far you could really push that. And boy, they really push it, and that is pretty impressive. I mean, I definitely was like, wow, they really go all the way here, which is pretty neat, So that's something to applaud them for.
Well, and another example of the Mode 7 stuff that I was also caught off guard and very impressed by were this in the Stage 6, I think it's called the Haunted Hall. I have it up here, with the swinging chandeliers. And the funny thing about that moment is I stood on the platform. So I see that this chandeliers are swinging, and there's some platforms that you're standing on, and there's a moment when I got up to that level, and it was a vertical level before that, so you've moved sort of to the top, and then the platform sort of goes to the right as well, the chandeliers to your left, and I thought, oh, that's sort of background eye candy, sort of like the cylinder was. Right. It's just a swinging chandelier. So I actually went right. I was like, okay, I'm just going to go out of this level here. And then, of course, you can't. And I was like, wait a second.
Where do I go?
Am I going to be jumping on that chandelier? Which is like, okay, those platforms sort of look like you can jump on them. Their art's a little bit different because of the Mode 7 sort of the way that it changes the way the pixels draw. But then when you jump on that first one, it's just a little bit of a mind blown there too of a game doing that, which, that's like 3D games, bread and butter kind of stuff. But in a 2D game like that, pretty impressive. And so that was another surprise for me as well, just execution wise.
Absolutely. It's kind of funny. You can see too, when you're on those, you can see the math of the transformations because the character will move a little bit on the platforms as it rotates. Because the character's math doesn't transform in the same way, right? The character's at this position wherever it is, and the world's kind of rotating out from under them. I mean, notice this the most because it was a little less actiony, but in the section where the first one we discussed, where you hook to you whip the thing and the whole room spins, you land on that first platform and it'll slowly creep you to the left as it rotates, right? Which is funny. It's like you don't stick in the right place because that's additional, like, rotating the character's position in that space. Instead, it's just like, oh no, we'll just let you fall into position. If it falls, that's fine because you'll just move probably a pixel and you won't notice. But it does creep sort of generally to the left of the screen if you jump onto it soon enough. And that was really funny. I was like, am I going to go off the edge? Like, is this slipping? What's going on? Oh, it's because of the transformation. I get it. Okay. Mathematical transformation, I mean. So,
well,
it's just a weird thing. In the chandelier, you don't feel it because you have to jump and you're moving kind of quickly and you don't have time to really think about it, but it's going to happen there as well.
Well, are you saying that on the other example, so I didn't mention this in the first episode, but a small thing that I was impressed by that I guess now that I'm thinking about it might be mode 7 stuff happening is the drawbridge in the beginning of the game. I think it's a drawbridge or something, right? You stand on it, you can walk up it, but if you don't keep walking, I think you slide backwards, right? It's because it gets steeper and steeper, and I think at some point I don't know what happens. I'm trying to remember now. We'd have to go back and look at it. But I just remember being impressed.
I think probably they're just lifting you vertically. And so you would appear to be moving up because the distance you'd be down the drawbridge. Like they're not doing the math to move you kind of both up and.
But if you stop moving, I think you will slide backwards is my point. Which
I think that's
which a lot of these games weren't doing much of,
Yeah.
Mario had some platforms that were doing a little bit of that, but it wasn't to that degree. I just thought that was a small impressive moment for me. It was like, oh, that's pretty cool for this era to be doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I wonder if it does fall out of the math. I'd have to really look at that one again because it's sometimes very hard to tell what's an artifact and what's intentional with some of these things because you are mixing kind of modes of interaction with the screen. It's like, how's that just kind of an accident that happens? Was it deliberate? So it's sometimes hard to know. Or was it just like, that's okay. Like, that's not what it's supposed to be, but it's close enough and, the player can react to it. I mean, we still do things like that. Like, it's fine. The character has control of the right stick. It's fine. As we've talked about many times, is that sometimes just like, well, player's there, the player can fix that. If they're not going to deal with it, that's their own fault or what have you.
Oh yeah, there's constant compromise and give and take on that whole topic. It could be all sorts of things, right? Where you're like, well, it's basically a triage process, right? Of like, well,
how bad is it?
How bad is it, and can the willing suspension of disbelief cover that up enough, right? The main thing is you just don't, which I think is tricky for a game like this, which we talk about all the time, is the main thing you just don't want it to feel like the game has punished you, right? If the player feels like they've punished themselves, that's more able to be stomached. But
absolutely.
Yeah, so the mode 7 stuff, it's pretty cool. Caught me off guard, and it seems like they're still fooling around with it, especially, there was that Golem boss, which I really thought was cool, that got smaller as you destroyed, as you hit it,
And
it was
pretty
scaling.
It's dropping all that stuff down from the ceiling as well.
Yeah. So I feel like that they're really pushing the boundaries with this game, and as I've already mentioned, sort of the theme of it and the tone of it, I think is just kind of dumb fun, and I love it. As compared to sort of the Nintendo games.
It almost makes me feel a little bit like, and I draw this a lot, that it sort of feels like Dungeons and Dragons to me, where you come into an encounter and you learn a little bit about how the world works, and then you take that forward to the next thing. So, and this one feels really clever and neat at times. Like you had mentioned those that enemy that kind of pushes up the floor and moves to the right. And the first time you encounter that, there's a row of spikes, but if you just run, you can outrun it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not going to crash into you. And they do this a lot. And the next time you run into it, you can actually see as you're running, like, oh, I'm not gonna make it. And so you have that moment of like, well, what can I do? And you crouch at just the right time, and it almost actually the thing it feels a lot like is the penitent man gets on his knees, right? From the end of the Last Crusade. Where he's like the penitent man, and they're both like, you've got that cross cutting between Indiana Jones and his father, and then he's like, oh, the penitent man kneels before God or something, like, I guess is what he says, and then he kneels at just the right moment, and I sort of felt like that when I did that. No, and those are great moments, and it makes me forgive this game a lot. Have that.
No, and there's lots of them. I that was the one specific one that I wrote a note down, and I should write more notes down. But there's been a lot of nice moments like that where they've combined certain things together to create a really interesting moment. And I had forgotten until you mentioned it that we had met those. Had we met those sort of underground mound things before? Or was that introduced in that section?
It's just those two places, as far as I know.
Yeah, but the two, just a really brilliant little moment of level design, pacing, and mechanical combination there for those two moments. Really appreciate them, and that's really kind of that attention to detail is throughout the game for the most part. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and
a lot of it's understanding. I feel like they're teaching you the timing, like how the world works as far as how time, how much time different actions take. Because I feel like the same thing is happening there's that place, and this is like in the second or third stage, where there's the plants that drop from the ceiling, and the first couple that you pass by drop. They each come, I think, from different heights. First couple you drop by, you can actually get past them and like turn around and whip them. But then the third one, you actually have to whip up, which is faster than trying to go past it. If you try to go past it, it'll just drop on you and you'll take some damage. So I think they're often playing with that as one of their sort of principal design resources or teaching resources of like, here's how long this thing takes versus this thing. Like, it's faster to whip than it is to run, because he is sort of a stodgy, grounded, slow-moving character, like we talked about. So it's actually often faster to use the whip to do a thing. And they're kind of teaching you exactly how long each of these things is. So when you're having that moment where you're being chased by the bump on the ground, you're like, oh, I can make that. In the first time, and then you're like, oh, I clearly can't make this. And you only have that amount of time between realizing that and when it catches up to figure out what you're going to do. So it's I really appreciate the way that they play against those sort of variables.
Well, and they have a constant theme that they use that I guess the genre in general often does use this, but because you have essentially a ranged attack, I think they lean into it much more heavily here. And that's sort of, I wanted to try to not say it in a negative way, but there's a punishment for not reacting quickly to the circumstance, to the situation. So with the plant example you just gave, I believe what happens is not only do they fall on the ground, but then once they're on the ground, they actually creep towards you. They move around, right? So it really behooves you to hit it when it's on the ceiling, right? Because if you miss that, similar things to like not hitting a bat right away when it's flying, when it just has left the ceiling or when it hasn't even left the ceiling, or the dogs that sort of respawn or whatever, or the ghosts, right? If you don't hit them fast, they become a nightmare for you. Because they're just the ghosts specifically, because they're kind of going in a random pattern around, and then they fade out, so you're not sure where they are. So really, you want to like memorize those timings and hit things right away, because once the combinatory nature of having multiple enemies on screen happens to you, you're pretty much, it's all over, right? So it's very much kind of based on this.
Where there was those glowing lights and the ghosts.
Oh my goodness. I don't know what
those glowing lights were, but that's a very tricky, like, you're worrying about the time and space trade-offs of two things at the same time, of like, okay, well, I'm going to have less time to react the closer it gets. So that's the space aspect. But then you also have basically a couple of competing sine waves that you're trying to figure out, and one of them's phasing out. It's that section it felt really, it wasn't so hard that I couldn't get past it in like a couple tries, but at the same time, I was like, that was satisfying. That was like the sweet spot for me. It was like, okay, I didn't quite get it the first time, but it didn't take me tons of times. It took me
It was
a couple of times,
Right. Yeah, they hit the tuning and balancing sweet spot there, right? Where
for me
anyway, in other cases, and that's a good point. It definitely depends on the player too. So it's really making a game like this for everybody is really, but the plan example is still an interesting one to me because there's essentially 3 phases or 3 sort of states, right, for an enemy. And they do that from time to time with a few different enemies, which I really appreciate, because I think it's not necessarily fair to say that Mario's most enemies are sort of like have 1 or 2 states and then their bread and butter is combining those things. But I do appreciate some of these enemies having multiple, more than 2 states like that. So you have to really think about it. If you miss that shot, you have to think and react, and then you kind of get in, and that's where the panic sets in, right? Where you're like, "Uh-oh, I've 2 plants are now running around. There's a bat flying now too," and you're just like, I should just restart.
I should just go back. Yeah, the other thing that I've found it doing is sometimes they'll play with your how quickly you want to move through the level. And I'm thinking in particular of areas where there's like 4 bats hanging in a row. Mm-hmm. And they fade into the background a little bit, so they're not super well telegraphed. But you're going to take at least a couple of hits if you don't kind of stop and take one at a time. If you're just kind of running to the right, they'll all just fly at you. And that's another sort of weird pacing thing that they're playing with, again, this weird sort of timing issue. And again, it's maybe not super fair because they're not teaching you before it happens that you're going to have to deal with it. I mean, you've seen single bats, but now it's like, oh, there's 4 right in a row. Yeah. They are fairly invisible against the background. And so there's a couple challenges there just to even read what you're seeing. And, those things flew into me several times and was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Yeah. So you got to kind of like know to stop there. And I think some of that is just, you have to learn the level, right? Or the stage or whatever to get good at this next section. But man, it's something else. Yeah.
Yeah. I do wish, I guess maybe it's just because of the way we're playing it and we're not because we're not dying in the same way, we're not replaying levels so as many times as probably you had to in the original version playing on the original console. But I feel like the game definitely would benefit from sort of the Zelda style pickup sort of, design where you're kind of getting what you need more than everything being so discreetly placed. Because there's times when I just don't, whether I'm pressured through time or the enemies that are chasing me or something, where I just don't want to go and get every candlestick in every nook and cranny and try to figure out where everything is, and it's probably the nature of the game is really that's the game they designed. That's the game they wanted it to be, right? Where everyone knows where everything is. But, and it's very much impacted by the way we're playing it for the podcast. So I definitely admit that. But the reason I'm bringing this up is I feel like I'm really not using the secondary items almost at all. And I feel like they wouldn't probably fundamentally change the game that much, but I feel like they would definitely, if I spent more time dabbling with them and like keeping the ones that I want and making sure I don't accidentally pick up ones I don't want, especially for certain bosses, I really, because you're finding so many hearts, right? So you often have plenty of sort of quote unquote ammo, but I'm just like not focusing on all those extra things because they're just hidden all over the place,
I find I don't. This last session I tried to use them more, and especially on the bosses. I tried to make sure I was tossing them out there to make sure I was getting through them a little bit more easily. But yeah, by and large, I don't use them, and I don't think about. I just I just pick up whichever one comes along. I just am
Yeah,
constantly
that's what I
getting new
mean,
ones.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't, I guess that's sort of high level play maybe. And, it is
Yeah.
to some degree, it's a score attack game, right? Still,
Yeah.
because you can get a password for every level. You could just go back and, be just like doing this level again to see if you can do better and experimenting. And like there is for a certain time and place, there is that kind of replayability. It's not really attractive anymore as a design feature, but I do feel like that's part of, again, that sort of arcade history of both difficulty, but also challenging your buddies. Like, oh, I'm going to put in a quarter and I'm going to do better. I can still remember my best Ms. Pac-Man score or whatever, right? I can remember that stuff. So.
Or did you find the axes on stage 4 or whatever? Like, oh no, I didn't even know they were there. It's like it's the Mario hidden block, sort of mentality, which again, it's a bread and butter kind of thing. So it's more maybe just a taste thing than anything for me.
Before we move to feedback, you want to talk a little bit about moving up and down, or mostly up, I guess? There's levels that are more vertical, and then also the stairs was a thing you wanted to talk about.
Oh, yeah. I guess in this last episode, in the last session that we played, there were a lot more vertical levels happening, which let me look back on the first two stages. I don't think had much of that at all.
No, I think it was stage 3 or 4. 3 and 4, actually. I think both had a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was impressed and happily surprised by having some of the sort of sub-levels of the stages be entirely vertical, where you're climbing up. And that was a nice change of pace. And the reason it came to mind, and I think I put the note down, was you can start seeing some of the you can track the lineage to probably Symphony of the Night, where they start doing more Metroidvania type stuff, and they're starting to dabble rather than just that traditional side-scrolling, horizontal sort of level design. They're starting to really figure out and fool around with what they can do vertically, which opens up a whole lot of things for level design. And so, especially when they have the grapple hook thing, right? They start using that more too. And so that was a nice surprise with this last session, and I'm sure it'll be something that will be able to connect with the Metroidvania style structure if we get to that point down the road in other games. And then the stairs, though, are...
That's a different thing. That's more of a challenge, navigation challenge.
It's sort of, I think, a good idea on paper, but maybe just not, weirdly executed. Because it's sort of a hybrid, right? It's like you give the player the ability to go upstairs, which allows them essentially to ascend farther than a jump would give you without creating a bunch of platforms to get you up there, multiple jumps. Right. But what it does in this particular case is it creates a need for them to now create a new rule set for how stairs work in a platforming game. And it's just finicky. The rules, maybe it's just finicky for me because I haven't mastered it, but there seems to be times when I don't know if it's collision based or whatever, that inconsistent about where where I'm pressing the direction based on what I think should be happening and when I'm ascending or descending. And then there's also the sort of, how do I, you can jump down from stairs to a lower level, but if you are jumping and you land on stairs, you actually go through them. But then Brett said there's a technique where if you're pressing in a certain direction when you land on the stairs, then you will stick to them.
Yeah, so that actually brought to mind a question for me. Are you playing with an analog stick?
I am, yeah. Well, I'm playing on the Switch, so
you're playing with the analog stick, though.
Yeah, because they're really
that makes me wonder because
on the Switch, right?
Yeah,
it's just buttons,
right?
So
right, it's not really a D-pad. Yeah, so I wonder if that's part of the issue too, because I'm playing on the SNES Classic with the SNES controller, and it's not there are no sticks, right? So there is that feels different, and maybe it's a lot easier for me to execute the landing and moving diagonally, because I bet that's a little a little funky with the analog.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll see. Yeah, I fooled a little bit with, using the sort of non D-pad on the Switch when I first
Yeah.
started the game, but it didn't feel like it was going to play well that way. But
I
I'll go
wouldn't
back
think,
to it
yeah.
and see.
I don't know.
Because
It's
doing
awfully
it that,
small.
well, it's small, but it's also they're discrete buttons, right? It's not an actual D-pad. So,
Right.
an up angle, right, to go up is basically
Yeah.
would
Upright
require me
is
to
two
press
buttons.
the buttons,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a little weird. So, but I'll still fool around with it. You make a good point that it could be related to that. Still, the rules for landing on them. So you
And
do
you
a
can't
lot
jump
of.
off of them either. So it's
You
just
can't jump
weird.
off of
Yeah.
them. It's sticky. So it's basically like almost like a modal rule set in the middle of this platforming game.
Yeah.
That for me right now, at least, and maybe it's because of my input, difference, for me kind of breaks my brain sometimes. And I've found myself running into a bunch of false positives where I think I'm on the stairs, or I think I'm going up, or I think I'm fully off of it, but I'm still stuck to it, and then I can't jump. And so, you know what I mean? So there's like a bunch of little kind of edge cases are created there that are sometimes in the middle of a really tense moment. And it's like, I don't want to be fighting these stairs right now. So again, sort of like a neat idea in a game, in a genre that was fooling with this stuff. Metroid and others don't have this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's sort of like early cover in 3D cover games, where sometimes the cover was too sticky or not sticky enough. You weren't sure if you were in cover, and this feels very similar to problems that we were having just, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, or whatever. So yeah, it's these sorts of problems just persist. I mean, whenever you're adding stuff where it's not really clearly communicated to the player. Of course, there were fewer buttons back then, but I mean, I think a lot of cover shooters are like, press a button to go into cover, so you know that you're in cover because you chose to go into cover, as opposed to sort of the early "I'll help you go into cover" games. I think is a real difference, and that's maybe a thing here. Of course, they don't have the luxury of tons of extra buttons either, so maybe that's something that they would have thought about differently, or I don't know. They could have just been more generous with the collision, honestly. I mean, if I could have jumped on the stairs but then landed back on the stairs and not had to worry about falling through, I'd be perfectly happy with that. So
yeah, they made some choices, right? They intentionally have some level designs where they want you to be able to drop down from the stairs onto platforms below, and they didn't have to do that. So, they're experimenting, so I'll give them that. And it's definitely a bit of an uncharted territory. I mean, the cover in a shooter is a good example. The other example is really ladders, right? Ladders in various games, you can do it wrong. And
everybody did.
And you think to yourself, well, I need a way to get the player, to ascend certain situations. We'll put a ladder in, but it creates, I guess my sort of micro lesson learned here with these stairs is just, it creates another rule set for the player that is changing the mode that they're in. Right. And so shifting that over shouldn't be taken lightly. There's a lot of work that goes into making that streamlined. I'm
remembering the ladders in particular in Kingdom Hearts most recently on the cast of just on that one on the pirate ship and just walking up and then immediately going down. And you're like, just let me. I don't want. This is not fun. Good recent example for us.
Yep. So we can. I want to talk about music some more, but let's do that next time.
Okay.
Couple specific ones to call out for people who maybe haven't played or been playing along, but 3.2 and 3.3. 3.3, I wrote a note down. Music in 3.3 is jazz? ?
Okay.
So you should go back and listen to it on video or something. Both of those levels I was pretty impressed with. And I know that Castlevania music specifically, especially this game, has always been heralded as some of the best, music of the time. So, but we'll talk more about that next time. We can move on to feedback.
Okay, absolutely. So we have just a few letters, I think, this time. I'm double checking now. Yeah, no new singing reviews via podcast review.
Darn.
Thankfully. we have an email from from the person who wrote our last one. But darn, he says. Of course, you can give us reviews in your podcast review avenue of choice. I'm subscribed to all the Apple Podcast versions. So if you put it in some other one, I'll happily read it. You just have to point me to where it is. And you can send us feedback via the email at devgameclub@gmail.com, where you, sir, have the first of our emails. It's actually, let me set this up a little bit. I basically took two emails from the same person, merged it down a little bit, cut a couple of things that were repeated from previous episodes about abduction, primarily from Nicholas McCormick. He had also mentioned the theme park, the Myst theme park that we had discussed, and somebody else had sent a link about. But why don't you take it from there?
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. Good luck, good job on that. Okay, so from Nicholas McCormick. I guess there's a section cut in the beginning here, so I'll just jump in.
Yep.
You may also find it interesting to know that apparently, despite making the best-selling PC game ever at the time, superseded by The Sims, publishers took so much money from Cyan that they ran out of money by Myst 4. Apparently, this is gossip, he says, during the development of Myst 3, they were told by the publishers to split the game in half and sell them as Myst 3 and 4, crippling the game horribly. It's still incredible to me that even after their wild success, Cyan was screwed over by their publisher, necessary at the time due to physical printing and brick and mortar connections. They took about 60% of profits. Thanks again. And he goes on. What you said about the world's internal consistency is my favorite part of the game. I adore abduction because it has one single suspension of disbelief, which are the seeds. And everything else is 100% internally consistent. This style of design naturally lends itself to show don't tell design and the ability to walk away from the game and in your own head figure out where to go next. Those are excellent points. Yeah. Or that is an excellent point. And I had also heard that about, and it's, we probably best that we didn't really ask Robin about it, but because it's probably a sore topic, but Cyan, that whole deal is a bit of a game development sort of, not legend, but there's a myth there about sort of like how bad that deal was for them. Cyan was definitely sort of one of those unfortunate examples of a bad contract or something where people sort of use it as a tall tale, unfortunately, for those folks.
And I think, it's something that David Brevik also mentioned about Diablo and what a terrible deal they had. It was only because they ended up being merged into Blizzard that it worked out okay, because they had agreed to make Diablo for a ridiculously low sum. And there was a lot going on at that time. I think that often we don't really know how long things are going to take, and this was certainly at a time when that sort of planning was not common, to actually scope out your game entirely and actually know how long everything was going to take. There were so many unknowns. They didn't even know how their video was going to work, right? As we talked about, so there's often those kinds of things where you're maybe thinking your deal is better than it is. And maybe the deal changes as a result of not delivering things on time and things like that. So there's lots of things that could have happened to kind of get to where they were. But again, as he mentions, the sort of having to make connections with distributors basically in order to get games into stores was something that a small shop couldn't do. These days you have digital distribution of various kinds, and that's a lot easier to deal with because the contacts there, you just email and here's a web page that describes the API or whatever, and it's not super complicated to put something on a store. Some are more complicated than others, but back in the day, it was, you want to actually sell a product? Well, it has to be manufactured physically somewhere and boxed up and manuals printed and all that stuff and assembled. And then it has to actually go into an actual store somewhere on a truck, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. and that was that was beyond the reach of most developers. And so publishers would take a huge cut as a result.
Well, and there's always that, back then it was even worse, and it's still the case now, but there's that sort of that initial conundrum of we want some funding to do this cool thing that we want to do. Everyone hopes for a hit, but no one really assumes that there will be a hit, right? And for the most part. And so they went into it thinking, well, we want to just make this thing. We think it's cool. And, Robin told the story of them shopping the disc around at that, whatever that, fair.
The HyperCard fair.
I can't believe that story. That was crazy that they're just sitting there, shopping around. They're just trying to get it done. They're not thinking about what if this thing blows up, and protecting themselves and stuff. And that's why Dave was talking about that with Diablo, right? They just wanted to make an RPG. And luckily people have this has happened enough where hopefully people are thinking more about this, but it still happens today, unfortunately.
It certainly does. Yeah.
To Brett's point, at the very least, something that was definitely eye-opening for me as I got more and more involved with sort of the complications of shipping games at Lucas later on, is sort of how retailers really work with it. Within the process, and that's changed very heavily these days because they're not the 1,000-pound gorillas that they used to be because of this distribution's changed, but sometimes they still are. But they just had all the cards, and so you needed those relationships with the publisher to do that. We were very lucky and unique in Lucas because it was all an inclusive company, the publisher and developer. So,
and that was when I started, when I would talk to Darren Stinnett about how the financial end of the business would work, and just my eyes being open to like, oh, this person takes this much and this person takes this much. And then when you're dealing with a platform holder like Sony or a Microsoft today, but back then I guess it would have been Nintendo or Sega, what you were giving away just to get the thing made, that your licensing fee was like, oh, you got a DVD or something for PlayStation 2, that's $20 a unit just off the top just to get the thing made, which is just a lot of money, when the games were $50 or whatever, or even less. I guess they were 50 mostly. So it just, it was eye-opening, and a PC market was much better because there weren't so many consoles yet that it was a huge win. There were a lot of PlayStation 1s, I guess, but that was a big chunk to give away to Sony. So then you had the PC market where it's like, well, the cost of goods is actually really low to put something on a CD, because everything was still CDs at the time. And so you ended up pocketing half again as much, from just the pure printing of the thing. It's just really, and all of that has changed so much in the years since. Anyway, let us move on to Zimmy Finger, who has a couple comments, if that is your real name, Mr. Finger. Super Castlevania IV and Stairs, your favorite. In this game, in this game, I really like how they build on their mechanics while introducing new ones, like combining the whip swinging mechanic with a rotating area. Something we talked about this time. I actually didn't realize you could extend your whip when swinging until I got to this point. Lastly, when climbing stairs, if you hold up in the opposite direction, you will walk backwards up the stairs. While this doesn't do anything mechanically, it's one of my favorite things to do. Thanks and cheers, Zimmy.
Holy, what?
Yep. It was a weird thing.
That's hilarious. Huh. Yeah, I mean, there's a richness to the mechanics. Like the other thing that I was reading, I don't remember maybe when I was getting ready for the first episode, but moving while crouching was a big deal as well. I don't think Mario does that, right? He just crouches. But I don't think you can move. Well, maybe you can.
I don't recall. I feel like you can, but I'm not sure when that was introduced. It's definitely in 64.
No, I meant in the
earlier ones. I don't remember. I don't remember, to be honest.
But that was, and there's actually a couple times when I actually found it useful to do so. But yeah, using
I think if you're running, you can crouch and he'll slide a bit.
in this game.
No. In
yeah,
Super Mario.
Yeah, you can slide through. Right. When you slide through gaps and stuff. Yeah, I think you're right. But you can crouch, walk, and use your whip. And there's those hands that come out of the pictures that sometimes grab you. You can walk under them and then still fight enemies, and just avoid them altogether, or crouch walk under them. So that's, there's some depth there that, was pretty unprecedented. Metroid wasn't doing that stuff. Their depth was in the world design and the ability design rather than the mechanics as much. But yeah, it's
a good point.
Walking backwards upstairs. That's pretty.
That's not something I can even manage. So I appreciate that the game does it.
Yeah. Well, he is a hero, so.
So yeah,
we're not.
I do throw a whip up the stairs occasionally and pull myself up, but
yeah, I'm sure you do. Want me to go to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, what was his other? Oh no, that was we got him.
That was the part of the other one. Yeah.
Okay, so subject for this email is Radiohead and Obra Dinn. Huh. I always mess up Mike's last name. Mike.
Vote? I say. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. VOGT for the audience. Hi, Dev Game Club. Thanks so much.
It might be Voggett.
It might be. I'm going to go with vote. Voggett. Yeah. Voggett. Maybe we should just do that. We'll just change it to Voggett on the cast, no matter what he says it is. Thanks so much for doing my singing review on air. It was the highlight of my week. I'm not sure it was the highlight of my week, but I'm glad you got a kick out of it, Mike. Yeah, it was pretty. You really threw him for a loop on that one. Radiohead, I just could not believe that choice. But I see where this email is going, so it's going to get better. When you guys start selling T-shirts, you can put me down for 2. Also, when I post my Bohemian Rhapsody follow-up review, I'll add timestamps. Oh, please do that. That would be incredible. Okay, as for gaming content, I just wrapped up Abduction, courtesy of that GOG giveaway a couple of weeks back. I never played Myst or any of its follow-ups before, and holy cow, was I blown away by this game. It actually reminded me a lot of a game I played earlier this year, 2018's Return of Obra Dinn. I had a similar thought that I forgot to mention. While the two games have plenty significant structural differences, it's easy to see they share the same DNA. If you haven't tried that one yet, I give it highest recommendation I can. I also think it's great that both the original innovators in this genre and newcomer are creating modern, interesting takes on a 25-year-old style of game. No question this week. Just keep up the awesome work, and thanks for getting me to dust off my SNES Classic for Castlevania IV. Take care, Mike Voggett. Yeah, I actually haven't played Obra Dinn, but I've watched a bunch of videos on it and listened to a lot of people talk about it. And for some reason, I had a similar, just vague thought when I was playing Abduction too. But yeah, it's alive and well. And I agree with him that it's really cool that Cyan specifically is still making this stuff. Yeah. And I think Abduction is a really good example of a modern version of, if you tell them make a game today like they're used to making, I think that's what they did. As far as I can tell, I haven't finished it, but you did. Yeah.
Oh, I did. And absolutely. I agree. And there's great surprises in how the world works. I'm not sure you got to the big one, huge surprise, but it did, as someone earlier pointed out, it was Nicholas. It also has that feel of being able to kind of think about the game when you're not playing it, like to have those moments of like, oh, I wonder if I could do this. I must be able to get to that. How would I get to that? And just kind of working backwards in your mind from what you think the solution must be to actually getting that. I mean, I was playing Myst 3 earlier before the cast, and I had moments like that, like, okay, there's got to be a thing with this. Like, so I must be able to get over there because I have to be able to do something with that thing I can sort of see moving over there. And there were just those moments of, it's got to be connected somehow. That's got to mean something. And I love that about these games. And Yeah, the Oberdin, Return of the Oberdin is great. That's a Lucas Pope game. For people who don't know, is Paper
Mm-hmm.
Papers, Please.
Yeah.
What he's best known for. Although Oberdin got great reviews last year, and it's one that I definitely intend to get around to. Maybe I'll throw it into my big pile of Myst-likes. But yeah, it's definitely a whole. There's this sort of mental framework where you're kind of putting these clues together and building a whole consistent understanding of the world around you that I do really appreciate about them. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just glad they're not gone. There's always that, every few years some genre or another's, somebody says, oh, that genre's dead or whatever, and it's like, I'm happy that, and in both of these cases, I think you could probably call them essentially indie games. I guess Abduction was basically, I don't know who published.
It's a pretty
that.
small team on Abduction.
It's still a small team, right? Yeah, that was in Unreal, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, Unreal.
So it's not maybe blockbuster stuff per se, but you don't need it for that, right? And you could obviously say Myst was also essentially an indie game that ended up getting a publisher, but I'm just glad that that we can still have an industry and a medium that can still do this stuff, and people can find ways to make it still possible, rather than having things die out.
And I hope they keep going because, as I found, I quite enjoy them.
Yeah, apparently
I'd just really forgotten, to be honest. I had enjoyed Myst back in the day, and I never got around to Ribbon because, like I said on the cast, it had come out right around the time I was applying for jobs and moving to California, and it just kind of slipped by me. Just one of those games I didn't get around to. And it was so much fun to revisit that and just have it break my brain because of how interconnected everything was. Moving to Myst 3, it's a different studio. It's Presto Studios, who did the Journeyman Project games. It feels a little bit different. There's definitely... there's kind of a mix of puzzle designs, although they do kind of go in some weirder places, weirder directions. There's a whole level or whole age rather, that's like plant-based. All these interactions of kind of the ecosystem. Very interesting world in particular. It's very strange. Not communicated super well as some of the more mechanical ones, because it's not always obvious how things connect together. Yeah, anyway, I mean, it has been tons of fun revisiting those myself, and I might just keep doing it. I guess we'll segue to the, hey, send us feedback, but also you can find me playing that sort of thing on twitch.tv/Brett Duville most weeknights. I usually play the cast game on the weekends. So whatever we're playing for the cast, and if I finish early, then I go back to whatever I'm playing. I do that many days. Anyway, thanks for all of that feedback. We enjoy getting all the feedback. We read almost everything on the podcast. If we don't, I do reply to you. So you can just shoot that to devgameclub@gmail.com. Next week, we're going to finish this game, right? In theory. I don't know. The difficulty ramp is not slowed down, so I will be leaning into that.
We have some tools to aid us, hopefully. I'm worried about. The other thing I forgot to mention is in this last session is I've really appreciated the concept that bosses are in inconsistent places, because it just creates this extra tension where I'm not sure when the boss is going to show up. It's just a very unfamiliar feeling in a game of this type that usually has a pretty consistent structure, But I just think it's hilarious. You're like, is this the room? And you kind of walk in a little bit. You're like, is the screen going to stop scrolling? Am I now going to have to fight for my life? I don't know. It's just really interesting. I just didn't know they did that. So yeah, I'm just saying that in that I'm anticipating a lot of boss troubles ahead.
Yeah. But, most of the bosses have been pretty interesting to fight.
True.
I haven't always gotten very good at them. Like, I never was particularly good at that skull fight, dodging the things that fall from the ceiling.
I'm just spamming I'm not doing a good job. I will say, though, a dancing ghost couple with rapiers.
Yeah.
The best boss I've ever. I could not believe what was happening. I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I don't know if they went to like Disneyland's Haunted Mansion or something, and that was their inspiration, but just
Oh yeah, that's a good pull. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was wondering where that came from, because it made me think of the scene in, I don't know if you saw Ready Player One last year.
I didn't know.
Yeah, there's a scene where they're reproducing The Shining.
What?
But this part of it goes all in, because there's ballroom scenes in the original The Shining.
I guess. Yeah.
But when it's made into a level, it becomes like this whole thing where there's ghosts all over the place that are dancing. And so it's like playing it tonight or a couple days ago, I was like, oh, this reminds me of that bit in Ready Player One. So, yeah. Yeah, it goes all kinds of weird places with the Shining kind of tribute. Like there's playing with scale and things like that. There's all kinds of weird things that happen in that. It's made to be more of a video game level, but I wonder if that was also reaching for Castlevania, and a homage that I didn't recognize when I saw it.
Well, the dancing ghosts in the Haunted Mansion are just sort of an infamous, Imagineering trick that everyone always talks about in that ride. So, but anyway, that's the first thing I thought of, at least just because I'm, Disneyland fan. But just the fact that those are the bosses, I just thought was just hilarious. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see what else they got coming.
We'll see what else shows up. Well, you can follow us on Twitter at DevGameClub, where you can also find my co-host.
At Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I already mentioned that you can find me streaming most nights at twitch.tv/Brett Douville. I just finished Myst 3, and I will probably roll right into Myst 4, because that's just what I'm doing these days.
Jeez.
Because I just can't get enough. And then we'll see what's beyond that. Maybe return to the Obra Dinn one of these days. Anyway, you can also find the show and its show notes at devgameclub.com. Thanks so much for listening this week, and have fun playing games. Good night.
Good night.